In this video, I am going to look at a game I played last Tuesday in the 10th round of this year's Horsham Club Championship. I had the black pieces and was up against John Marshall. My opponent started with e4 and I responded with c5, the Sicilian defence. Play went knight f3, knight c6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, e5, the Kalashnikov variation. Now, white should move the knight to b5, threatening knight d6 check. Then black plays d6, and white's two main lines are knight on 1 to c3 and c4, both of which give him a reasonable chance for an advantage. However, instead of moving the knight to b5, white played the inferior knight f3. This allowed black to develop actively with knight f6, knight c3, bishop b4. Now, white should gambit a pawn with bishop c4 when it is risky for black to grab it and he should probably just castle. However, white didn't consider this possibility and instead played the passive bishop d3, defending the pawn. Black castled, and after bishop d2, here d5 was the most incisive move for black, giving him a good game. But he wasn't sure about this, and so played the rather more solid but passive d6, which is still a reasonable move. His position is perfectly fine here, but after d5 he would be fighting for the advantage. White now played h3, preventing bishop g4, and black responded with h6, preventing bishop g5. Play went castles, bishop e6, both sides are just developing, rook e1. This seemed a little odd, as it wasn't clear what the rook would be doing on e1. Rook c8, the natural square for the rook, a3. White decided to proceed by expanding on the queen side, which, to be fair, is his most reasonable plan in this position. Bishop a5. Naturally, black wants to retain his bishop. b4. Bishop c7. Knight b5. White threatens to lop off the bishop and also opens the way for c4. Bishop b8. Again, black preserves his bishop. c4. Knight e7. Now black regroups his knight to a more active square. Queen e2. Knight g6. Knight c3. White's knight now heads for d5. Rook e8, knight d5. Now, in this position, black was uncertain how to continue. He came up with the following manoeuvre, but it proved to be rather dubious. Knight h7, rook ac1, knight g5. But this allowed white to make a favourable exchange. Knight takes g5, h takes g5, and here white has more than one good continuation. For instance, he could play g3 with the idea that bishop takes h3 isn't possible because of queen h5, bishop e6, king g2, followed by rook h1 with a decisive attack down the h-file. Now black doesn't have to take the pawn on h3, but his position remains rather dubious nonetheless. So that was one possibility. In the game, instead of g3, white played queen h5, which was also good. And the basic threat here is to play bishop takes g5. And f6 isn't possible because white just plays queen takes g6 winning the knight. So black instead had to play knight f4. Now, in this position, white made a serious error by playing knight takes f4, swapping off his strong knight on d5 while improving black's pawn structure. Now, the thing is that the white knight on d5 is a strong piece, and while he cannot prevent black from exchanging it off, he wants black to exchange on d5, for instance with bishop takes d5, when after e takes d5 he will have a strong queenside pawn mass, which will support his strategy begun a number of moves ago to advance on the queen side. So instead of knight takes f4, white should have played something like queen f3, maintaining the knight on d5. Now, knight takes d3, queen takes d3 is an unfavourable exchange for black, as his knight is clearly a better piece than the white bishop. So instead of that, black should play something like g6, and now white has bishop f1, which is actually threatening g3. So for instance, if black played a6, intending bishop a7, improving the position of his bishop, white could play g3. Now, knight takes h3 check isn't possible because of bishop takes h3, bishop takes h3, g4, trapping the bishop. So black would have to play something like either knight takes d5, e takes d5, but then white has the aforementioned queenside pawn mass, or knight h5, bishop e3, when black's knight on h5 is out of play. Now, instead of a6, black actually has an ingenious response in the form of king g7, and this is actually directed against the move g3. So if white now continues with g3, black can in fact play knight takes h3 check, because after bishop takes h3, bishop takes h3, g4, rook h8, his bishop on h3 is, for the moment, defended. Now, white could try to round the bishop up, but this actually allows black to generate sufficient counterplay elsewhere. So, for instance, queen g3, rook h4, f3, f6, king f2. So the idea is pretty obvious. Rook h1, threatening rook takes h3, and then when black brings another piece across to support the bishop, rook h2 followed by rook on c to h1, and the bishop cannot be defended. So here black can actually play queen d7, so white will be able to win the bishop on h3, but black's queen will penetrate via the queen side and generate sufficient counterplay. So for instance, rook h1, rook on c to h8, rook h2, queen a4, rook on c to h1, queen c2. So now it's obvious what the problem is, that white's pieces are overcommitted to the king side, and he's not well placed to meet this queen incursion. So for instance, you could have king e2, queen takes c4 check, king e1, queen d3, and black should have a draw here by perpetual check. Anyway, so this is why, if we go back to the position after king g7, the move g3 is perhaps not White's best way of continuing, and he should look for other ways to improve his position. Now, he's probably still better here. I mean, the basic defects of Black's position haven't disappeared. His somewhat shaky pawn structure, the passive bishop on b8, the fact that White is the one with the active plan of advancing on the queen side, and Black way forward isn't so clear. But none of that happened in the game. As I said, after knight f4, White played knight takes f4, and after g takes f4, Black's position was perfectly fine. Now in this position, White had an ingenious possibility which worried me initially when looking at the position over the board, but I then realised that it wasn't really dangerous. And this is bishop takes f4, e takes f4, e5, looking to penetrate on h7 with the queen, which looks dangerous initially, but when you investigate it further, it's obvious that Black is fine. Indeed, Black is winning. So, for instance, d takes e5, queen h7 check, king f8, queen h8 check, king e7, and now queen takes g7 is met by queen takes d3, and Black has two extra pieces here, and White has no attack, whereas queen h4 check, king d7, queen h5, queen f6 sees the White attack run out of steam, and Black is just a piece up. So that was nothing to worry about, but it was nonetheless something that needed to be checked. Now, instead of taking on f4, White's most sensible move was probably g3, undermining Black's kingside pawn straight away to eliminate the possibility that he might start advancing them at a later date. However, instead of that, White decided to play on the queen's side with rook c2, intending to double rooks and play c5, but Black can deal with this easily enough. Now, over the next few moves, it's probably fair to say that neither side's play was terribly accurate. There were a lot of what looked like superior possibilities. So, for instance, in this position, probably the simplest way for Black to continue was a6, with the intention of bishop a7, bringing his bishop on b8, which would otherwise be very passive, onto an active diagonal. Instead, he played queen f6, which is perhaps not unreasonable. The idea is to perhaps push the g-pawn. Now, again, White had the possibility of playing g3, but instead he continued with his plan with rook on e to c1. Now, Black could have just played g5, but instead he played the rook move, rook e d8, which, to be honest, doesn't seem to have a lot of point to it. And indeed, the rook is probably on a worse square here, because if White had played g3, then f takes g3 would have been perhaps less attractive on account of bishop g5. Anyway, White didn't play g3 and instead played bishop e2. But this is actually rather dubious because it deprives the White queen of a couple of retreat squares. Now, here, black again could have just played a6, intending bishop a7, but instead he played g6, trying to exploit the position of the queen at once. And fortunately for him, white played queen f3, whereas queen h6 would have been better, and here black would have probably been best advised to play queen g7, swapping queens with an equal position. Anyway, white played queen f3, but now we can see one of the defects of playing bishop e2, which is that the queen can only retreat to this rather awkward square. Black played king g7 with the idea of possibly playing rook h8 with a kingside attack. Now, white decided it was time to try to create some play on the queen side, and so he played b5 with the idea of bishop b4, looking to exert pressure on the d6 pawn. Now, black should now have just continued with his plan of attacking on the king side with rook h8, which looks rather promising for him, as white's plan of attacking the d6 pawn is rather slow. However, black now became rather worried about this plan and started playing some rather passive moves, which led to white having a perfectly acceptable position. So play went queen e7, covering d6, bishop b4, and again black probably should have played rook h8, looking to attack on the king side, although with the queen e7 this isn't quite as strong as it was on the previous move. Instead he played b6, preventing c5, but creating a hook for the advance of the a pawn. Rook d1, hitting d6, f6. The idea of this is to play queen f7 and put pressure on the c4 pawn. a4, starting the a pawn advance to exploit the pawn on b6, queen f7, rook on d to c1. And here we have a sort of equilibrium where neither side can at the moment do anything active because of the need to focus on the c4 square. So white is forced to defend that square, but black also needs to keep up pressure on that square to prevent white from attempting anything active. So here, black should have just continued improving his position with the move g5, but instead played the inexplicable rook e8, which reduces the amount of cover he has on the d6 square and allows white to play queen a3, attacking d6. And now he has to play rook on e to d8, wasting a move to defend d6, while having allowed white to improve the position of his queen and actually be well placed to advance on the queen side. Play went a5, f5. Black decided it was time to play actively on the king side. E takes f5, and now black should have played g takes f5, maintaining pressure on c4, but instead he played bishop takes f5, and now the rook on c2 was free to move to d2, and black was under considerable pressure here. Now, black decided that his best hope lay in active play, and so he went for d5. Now, white should have thrown in the move a takes b6, because after c takes d5 as played in the game, black had the possibility of playing b takes a5, and after bishop takes a5, rook takes c1 check, queen takes c1, rook takes d5, rook takes d5, queen takes d5. Although black's position is still a little loose, he is over the worst. However, rather than b takes a5, he played the immediate rook takes c1 check. And after queen takes c1, he again failed to take the opportunity to play b takes a5, although it wasn't quite as strong in this position because white had bishop a3 when he stands very well. Note that rook takes d5 is not possible because of bishop c4. Anyway, instead of b takes a5, black played rook c8, but this allowed white to establish an overwhelming advantage. Queen b2, white places his queen on the long diagonal opposite the black king on g7. Black plays king h7, removing the king from the diagonal and planning to push the e-pawn. A takes b6, a takes b6, d6. This pawn will now prove very dangerous for black. e4. Black desperately attempts to create counterplay. Queen d4. White moves the queen to a very active central square. Queen d7. Black has to prevent the further advance of the d-pawn, but now his pieces are very passively placed. Now we come to a crucial moment in the game. Here, white should have played queen f6, maintaining his domination of the position. But instead he was tempted by the pawn on b6 and played queen takes b6, but this allows black to gain serious counterplay. Bishop a7, queen a6, bishop takes f2 check. Now white has a choice to make. He rejected king takes f2 because of e3 check, winning the exchange, but this was probably his best choice because after king f1, e takes d2, bishop takes d2, he does at least have two pawns for the exchange, and this is probably roughly balanced, but still naturally rather complicated to play. But instead of playing king takes f2, he played king f1, and after e3, he was in big trouble. This move supports the bishop on f2 and threatens the rook on d2. So white played rook d1, and now black decided on the flashy but effective bishop takes h3. The immediate point is that g takes h3 is met by queen takes h3 mate. So instead of taking on h3, white played bishop f3. But then black has another strong blow, rook c2. Once more, taking on h3, g takes h3, does not work because of queen takes h3 check, bishop g2, e2 check, king takes f2, e takes d1, queen check, bishop d2, rook d2 takes d2, checkmate. So instead of taking on h3, white decided to punt b6. And in this position, black has more than one way to win. Now, one of these possibilities is the forcing e2 check. Then king takes f2 is met by e takes d1, queen check. Queen takes e2 is met by rook takes e2, and then king takes e2 is met by queen e6 check, king f1, queen e3 with decisive threats, and bishop takes e2 is met by queen b7, again with decisive threats. Finally, instead of king takes f2 or queen takes e2, if white plays bishop takes e2, black has queen c6, which is again decisive. So that was one route to go. In the game, instead of e2 check, black decided to play bishop e6, threatening bishop c4 check, forking the king and the queen. Now, white doesn't have a defense here. In the game, he moved his queen back to d3, which proved to be hopeless. He could have played b7, but now black has a fantastic tactical blow, queen a4, with the idea that queen takes a4 is met with bishop c4 check, rook d3, bishop takes d3 check, bishop e2, bishop takes e2 mate. In the game, instead of b7, white played queen d3 and black naturally played bishop c4. Now, white tried b7, but then black played queen b5, threatening to take twice on d3. White played bishop e2, and now black had another nice tactical blow. Rook takes e2. Now if king takes e2, queen h5 check comes, and then either king f1, queen takes d1 check, bishop e1, bishop takes d3 mate, or g4, queen takes g4 check, king f1, queen h3 check, king e2, f3 mate. Instead of taking on e2, white tried b8, promoting to a queen, but now black had a very nice finish with rook e1 check. A neat deflection. The point was that rook takes e1 is met with bishop takes d3 check, rook e2, bishop takes e2 mate, and bishop takes e1, which was played in the game, was met with bishop takes d3 check, rook takes d3, queen takes d3 mate.